can't hear what you're
But
saying. You just...
you hear me?
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, when we switched to the channel, Discord was stuck on default, which is nothing. So I think it had defaulted to the microphone on my camera instead of my Yeti. So
Ah,
yeah, but here we are. Hey, and now we can see each other. Wonderful.
yeah. So, actually, yeah. You go ahead and introduce yourself, just to let people know who you are.
Sure. So, hello, everyone. My name is Brenton Langel. I am a poet, playwright, anarchist, and Ringo Award nominated comic creator of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which is on its uh, fourth issue now, and we're about to release our first trade. I'm also a former activist with Occupy Wall Street, and fun little fact, also I'm the very last official yippie in existence, as in the Youth International Party from the 60s. When I was working with Occupy, we did a lot of work with the Yippie Museum, and me and this guy John Murdoch were the last two people voted to be official yippies before the museum shut down because hippies are very bad at paperwork.
Yippee. That is not a term I've ever heard. Although I've heard the term yuppie before, I didn't know yippee was a thing.
Yeah, yippee. Did you see the trial of the Chicago Seven, like that movie that came out recently?
Can't say I did.
Okay, it's a big. It was by Aaron Sorkin, who's kind of a good writer, but also has had his horrible politics. So have you heard of Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman? Um,
I'm ashamed to say I'm not terribly politically well informed. Um,
okay, yeah, that's fine.
we
So
just...
yeah, so Abby Hoffman wrote "Steal This Book." Jerry Rubin was another one. They were part of a young leftist student movement, and the press had sort of coined the term hippie in the 60s. So what they came up with was yippie, which was, as they put it, a hippie who's been hit over the head by like a police club.
Uh,
Um, they did a lot of stuff. Most famously, uh, they went to protest the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Their plan was to put forth a pig to be the presidential candidate named Pegasus the Immortal. And they were charged, along with a Black Panther, with crossing state lines to incite a riot.
that
um,
sounds... trying to run a pig for president for
for president.
that is insane.
Yes.
Also very funny.
Oh yeah, and the whole trial just became this giant mockery. It was one of the things that destroyed the House of Un-American Activities Committee, because people could be destroyed by being told that they were associated with communists and radicals at the time, but they weren't able to make this kind of destruction happen with Abbey because he built his whole brand on being a nutso leftist. And very famously did stuff like they came into court one time all dressed in judges' robes, and the judge ordered them to take off the judges' robes. So they took off the judges' robes, and they all had police officer uniforms underneath.
God damn it. These people sound absolutely ridiculous.
Yep. Yeah, they're nuts. There was a radical space that we had in New York City during Occupy called the Yippie Museum Cafe, where we would run a weekly open mic called the People's Soapbox, and a lot of radical figures came through. It was a really, really interesting time just to be in New York City, like at the height of Occupy, and to have folks, to have that radical space to talk to people. And then, of course, the rich people forced us out because hippies are bad at paperwork, and that whole area is just being taken over by millionaires.
Yeah. All right. So, um, I, I do enjoy talking about politics stuff, but of
Yeah.
course, what we're here to talk about today is specifically world building, story design, and I like to talk about magic and video games.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I'm interested in world design for a theater. You do both theater and comic, or was it independent film and comic?
So I'm a playwright. I'm a trained playwright, trained screenwriter, and I've also worked in novels and comics.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had the most monetary success so far in comics. But I was a playwright in New York City for 10 years. I'm still the playwright in residence for State of Play Productions, Inc., though obviously we haven't done much with regard to COVID. And I've had 7 plays produced in Manhattan. Snow White Zombie Apocalypse is based upon the second play I ever had produced, which is one of my bigger hits, which is a play by the same name.
Right. Um, and I'm interested in sort of how in your experience these mediums the world building and storytelling differs and how
Mhm.
they're similar. One of so myself, I am Twitch's #1 expert in magic and video games because no other idiot would try to take such a title for themselves.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but I want to bring together creators of all sorts to sort of give their ideas on magic and mythology and storytelling, world building from any creative area. Because one of the things I realized is that if video gamers only listen to video gamers, then we're only gonna get video game style video game.
Yeah.
That's a sentence that's an absolute fucking mess if you listen to it too long.
Video game style video games. But no, I get what you're saying. If you stick within the confines of a certain medium, it begins to simply replicate itself, and you miss out on a lot of really creative work that could be happening.
Yeah, and I guess like you know what, I'm just gonna start with a more casual question. Do you have any video games that you're particularly a fan of the world building storytelling aspects of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say most recently I have been for Witcher 3 is huge and just so well done. It's probably one of the best video games that I have played from a storytelling perspective. I'm also a really big fan of the Dark Souls series
Okay.
because they, Souls, because of the way they do their storytelling, and they make a participatory relationship with the actual audience through like context clues and just little cryptic hints. I think Soulsborne is phenomenal for that. I'm also like right now I'm replaying Baldur's Gate 2 on my iPad because I found out somebody like remastered it. I hadn't played it since I was like in high school.
That's awesome. Actually, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. Baldur's Gate 1 is a little tough to play on the iPad, but Baldur's Gate 2 is about what I expected Baldur's Gate 1 to be like, based upon my memory of the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, video games they've been a huge influence on me. And my in fact, I actually have a new series that will be coming out. We're going to launch a Kickstarter for it, hopefully sometime later this year, called NPCs, which is a comedy about the lives of non-player characters in role-playing games. And it like stars a woman who like she's the she's the player character of her own kind of Mass Effect or Dragon Age style video game, and like right at the culmination, she takes an arrow to the knee and loses her PC status, and yeah, and
That's
has to she's got to get a job selling potions to other more important heroes. So that's kind of like my fantasy comedy series, and it's going to be drawn, and I can actually announce this here by Kit Buss of Critical Role Season 1, which I'm really excited.
Oh,
She's done some very
really?
yeah,
That's awesome.
she's great, by the way, to work with. I reached out to her, and she did a couple of variant covers for Snow White Zombie, starting with issue 4, and I'm looking forward to doing a whole book with her.
That's incredible. The fact that you were able to get her to take the time to work with you on all of that. And maybe it's just that I'm predominantly like a fan when it comes to online content creation more than I
Mhm.
am a creator. So like I put that kind of person on a pedestal. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, I kind of got to where I am by being a fan. The connection that led to me working with my very first artist for Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, Hondo Park, who is absolutely incredible. Like, I met the guy that put me in contact with him in the line to get Neil Gaiman's signature after he came to speak at BAM. I was like in line for 3 freaking hours. Beyond that, like one of the biggest artistic collaborations that I've had has been with the band called the Crew Shadows, and posters on the wall back there. I'm writing a novel with the lead singer, and literally, like, I was in my mid 20s and met him briefly after a concert in Cincinnati. And I told him that, I was a playwright, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Cool, write a play, put us in it." So I did. And I reached out to him 2 years later and half expected to get like cease and desist immediately. But he loved it, and we've been collaborating like ever since. We read parts of it. It started out as a play and then became a screenplay, and now we've decided the best form for the story is a novel. And we've been reading parts of it at DragonCon every year, except this year and the past one due to COVID.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wait, you said Cruise Shadow?
Yeah.
CRUX?
CRUX Shadows.
That is awesome. I know a number of fans of theirs, so that's pretty fucking incredible, my dude. Like
they're really cool people. Yeah.
And it sounds like you've gotten around a bit in creative circles.
Yeah, I do my best. I mean, I started out in the underground open mic scene in New York. That's actually how I got sucked into Occupy. Doing, I think, just one of the things when I started out, like with a theater degree, in 2006, and just thinking like, oh God, what did I do? Why did I get a degree? No one will ever give me a job. I just sort of put myself out there and continued to do my art and tell people about it. And one thing led to another. And, now I'm, publishing comic books and writing plays and novels and stuff. And I think that, so I guess my best advice is the same advice that Mo Rocca actually gave me of The Daily Show when he came to speak at my school. Because I asked him, like, how do I get on The Daily Show? And he answered it like kind of like, he got thrown by the question. So initially he said when he was on stage, he was like, I don't know, become Jon Stewart's bitch or something. And then like,
the fuck?
Yeah.
What kind of advice?
It was terrible. But then I went to him after the show, and because he was getting his book signed, I'm like, hey, I'm the guy that asked you that stupid question about how I get on The Daily Show. And he kind of looked at me and he said, the reason I got my job on The Daily Show is because I got it into my head that I would go to the graves of every unremembered president of the United States and just take a picture of myself on that grave. And it's too long and complicated to explain how, but that led directly to me getting my position as a correspondent on The Daily Show. So my advice to you is, if there's something crazy that you think you want to do, go do it. And I've lived my life by that motto, and it's worked out.
Hell yeah, that is an awesome piece of advice. Like that is right. That is the do stupid shit until it works level of advice that everybody needs.
Mm-hmm. I think so. So yeah, it's I've been lucky enough that people have responded to my art, and I tend to be pretty good at talking to people. I do a lot of debates and stuff. So larger creators with bigger audiences have been kind enough to speak to me, and kind enough to enjoy and project my art to their audiences. So yeah, it's really great, because like the biggest enemy of an artist is obscurity.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the biggest point of paranoia, if you would.
Yeah.
Is man, it is 100 times better to get a negative review than none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, dude. The whole reason we know Shakespeare existed, like as a person, the primary is actually a bad review. Like there's a guy you can look up. It's one of like the main primary sources about his life, and there's a dude going like, "Hey, there's this asshole named Shakespeare, and he thinks he can write plays like us educated men. What a joke." And that's how we know Shakespeare existed and wasn't like an amalgamation or totally made up.
That's actually incredible. I had no idea about that story.
Yeah, it's one of the things they teach you in theater school.
that's a very good lesson for anybody you want to get to stay in theater, because man, it's very hard. I can imagine it's very hard for anyone to stick it through in any creative endeavor.
Oh
um
yeah, it's brutal. Like you're putting your soul out there for people, because art, as a to create great art, you have to be vulnerable, you have to express yourself, you have to you have to share something, unique and like special to you, and hope that someone else out there sees it and feels what you feel and builds that connection with you. And like, yeah, as a result of that, it's a terrifying process, because we're all afraid of being judged, we're all afraid of being laughed at, and uh, usually the longer you do it, the thicker skin you develop. But also, like, you tend to find that a lot of the fears, just that's what it is, it's fear, because anything you can be interested in, someone else out there absolutely is interested in, and that's one of the things the internet's taught us.
yeah, yeah. All right, so on to the actual, topic, that real quick, I will meander a lot,
Mhm.
so it will end up off topic many times. If you The longer you stick around, it'll happen more and more.
Yeah.
But
I'll do my best to stick in there. I have ADD, so it's I very well may shoot off. So let's try to stay
but
focused.
okay, so you've written several different stories by this point. Um, and you said you are actually trained as a screenwriter, playwright?
Yep. I studied playwriting in college for 4 years. Learned a lot, mostly by accident. I started off thinking I was going to be an actor, but I realized, I think my senior year, that like there were all these plays that they wanted me to act in, and I was just like, where are like all the Vikings, and where's like the Vikings? Where's Kung Fu? Why do I have to do like the Merry Wives of Windsor?
Right.
I didn't really like a lot of, like, I loved the medium of theater, but I didn't like a lot of plays. And people in my department, actually, like, I would never shut up. I saw the Shaolin warriors come in, and for months after that, I was like, we have to do a kung fu play, we got to do something where we incorporate martial arts with the theater. And everybody was like, yeah, okay, Brent, you weirdo. And I got out of that school. It taught me a lot. A lot of it was being making opportunities for yourself. But also, my senior year, I had a summer job fall through. So, to make a long story short, I wound up hiking the first 600 miles of the Appalachian Trail, walking from like Waynesboro, Virginia or I'm sorry, from Gatlinburg, Tennessee to Waynesboro, Virginia, through the mountains.
Okay, so you wandered straight through my hometown there, actually.
Oh, great. Where's your hometown?
Cumberland, Maryland.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. That's right by the Maryland Challenge, where we try to do 4 states in like a day. I didn't do it because I'm not insane.
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds nuts.
yeah, but yeah, no, I'm an AT 2000 miler. I'm actually the author of the first play ever about the Appalachian Trail, which was North to Maine, which I started writing because I did the first 600 miles of the AT, and I called my mom and was like, "Hey, mom, I'm not going back to college. I'm going to finish the AT, and then I'll finish college." And she's like, "Absolutely not."
Man,
Yeah,
that's one of the things that a parent would never understand.
yeah.
It's particular about creative shit, because like I honestly I imagine that completing the AT, not to sound dismissive of
Mhm.
script writing classes or anything like that, the AT may have been more productive in pushing you towards writing than completing screenwriting classes or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I had written a play for my senior project, which was called Trojan Men. It was about what it's really like to be in a fraternity, because I was in a fraternity, and it was a terrible experience. Um, and so, like, I took that. The second play I ever wrote was North to Maine, because I got out of college. I worked for 2 years as a professional actor in and around the Midwest. had a tragedy happen, and kind of freaked out, left my job, and hiked the rest of the AT. Then got back and wrote North to Maine, which was for a while the thing that I was most famous for. Um, and then after that, I moved to New York City and started doing more plays. And at the time, I was still like, even before New York, I was like, well, maybe I really am an actor. And then I got to New York, and I was just like, no, this is serious. I'm a much better writer, so I'm going to write. And so I kept writing plays, and Snow White Zombie came out of that. It started out as a 10-minute play for a 24-hour play festival. I was like new in the
Okay.
city, and the way a 24-hour play festival works is they send out a writing prompt to a bunch of different writers, and then each of you you write a 10-minute play within a couple of hours and send it in, and they will then pick a few and like take them to full production within 24 hours or 48 hours or something like that. So anyway, I entered that festival. It was called Fairy Tale Smackdown, and I had the idea that I wanted to write a play involving zombies. And It was almost zombie Shakespeare, but then I realized I couldn't write in iambic pentameter. Um, so then I was just like, oh, I'll do Snow White Zombie, as in the play on White Zombie.
Right.
That play just lightning struck. It was freaking perfect from the very beginning. And if you read the first issue of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, like the 44-page double issue, that pretty much has the entirety of the first play in it, except the fight scene was added later. So
Okay.
that play, yeah, that play did really well. People came up to me and were like, hey, this reads like something someone who went to Yale wrote. And I'm like, oh, well, you should tell Yale because they rejected me. Um,
Honestly, from what I gather, any people coming out of Yale would suffer through the problem you talked about, trying to be an actor. Why
mhm.
isn't there anything with kung fu or zombies? Why isn't there anything entertaining in the theater?
Exactly. Yeah, it was really funny. One guy came to see North to Maine, who was a buddy of mine, has a Manhattan cable access show. Oh, I think that's my son beating on the door. Gavin, hold on, Daddy's talking to somebody. So anyway, he actually came to my show and saw it and videotaped part of it. And he had me on his cable access show. He's like, "You'll see this show and you'll like it. And you'll say, finally, I saw a play that was good." So yeah. Anyway, we went from that to the play got picked up into the Estrogenius Festival, which is a celebration of female voices.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I guess somebody saw me from behind, assumed I was a chick. Um, and we did really well. We won the Audience Choice Awards. We got an extended run, and so I took it and basically expanded it into a 90-minute version that ran in the Fringe Festival in like 2011. And it was my second play in the Fringe. It did incredibly well. Like we got sold out just about every night. Got wonderful reviews. And then it ended, and like I realized, like, oh crap, we put so much into that, and now it's over, and I've just got some reviews to show for it. So I started looking. I continued to write plays and continued to produce them. North to Maine got produced in New York, but I started looking for other ways to do something that could be replicated to more than just like a Manhattan theater audience.
Right.
Yeah, and that's when first I found this great screenwriting place called Jacob Kruger Studios or WriteYourScreenplay.com. Jacob, it's expensive, but like Jacob is a Emmy Award winning screenwriter, and he brings in like real pros. So I learned like screenplay structure under him. I learned action under a guy by the name of George Straighten, who wrote for Xena and Hercules. He actually helped me develop the screenplay version of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. I wrote Deruti, my movie about anarchist Buenaventura Deruti that's soon to be a comic book. I wrote that under a former HBO exec named Stephen Moulton. And I learned comedy from a guy who wrote for Jerome Pagazzi, who wrote. He was a former showrunner for Married with Children. And then I also just recently I've been in a comic writing class with Ron Martz, who writes like freaking Green Lantern and Witchblade and all that stuff. Um, so yeah, I basically, I have my classical actor and classical playwright training from college, and then I was in a position where I got a chance to pay a ridiculous amount of money to take classes from like actual industry pros, and it paid off.
Sounds like it. I mean, if I don't know what your financial situation would be like, but even if it's not for having a particularly profound financial situation, I mean, you've got, it sounds like this amazing breadth of life experience, specifically as far as creative endeavors go.
Yeah. Well, there. I think there's a lot of it. I've been accused before of being a method writer. I'm someone that believes you should try do your best to live your story as closely as you can. So, one of the reasons I went down to Occupy, beyond the fact that I really, I was seeing my friends there and seeing them get arrested and stuff, but also like, I believed in what we were doing. That was the closest way that I could involve myself in an anarchist movement, so I could write stories about, anarchism in Spain, so I could understand it. But so I could write a play about the Appalachian Trail. I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I'm a first degree black belt in Kyokushin karate. I've done full contact fights, and I did that so that I would be able to write the martial arts that I write into Swaza and a lot of the action sequences and everything else that I work on.
Okay. Yeah, that's. I mean, man, as somebody who does not give half a hair about fucking money, that
Mhm.
shit sounds amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I will say, yeah, financially, it's tough to be an artist. I beat my head against a wall for 10 years, essentially. But I learned, I was lucky enough to learn that when I first got out of college, I was cast as a full time actor in first a outdoor drama called Tecumseh. And then after that ended, I was at a place called Shadowbox Cabaret, which was like a dinner theater. I was like a full time employed actor. I was making peanuts, but um, one of the things that I learned at those jobs was I was like, I'd rather work on the side, like I'd rather work and do art that I believe in on the side
Hmm.
than be a full time actor and make my money doing it and, be a part of someone else's vision that I don't necessarily believe in.
Right.
Yeah, and so I put in the time. I worked, part time and full time jobs on the side, and as much as I could, wrote and after work. I remember like my first year in New York, I was just I would get off work at like 9 at night and then rush down to Under St. Mark's Theater in the East Village, and you know um, wait there for several hours to read my poetry for 7 minutes just to keep from going crazy. But it was great to be immersed in that kind of bohemian artist environment. So it wasn't just about reading on the stage. It was also about experiencing everybody else's art and hanging in the backyard and smoking perfectly legal cigarettes.
God damn it. Okay, so I heard you mention that you focused on combat and storytelling and these other things. How much consideration actually goes into world design in
Mm-hmm.
your worlds and your stories? Because listening to the way you talk about these things and looking at um the panels that are on the Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully this doesn't sound too insulting, but it looks and sounds like overall world design is not necessarily a big focus.
Well, what do you mean? Can you and don't worry, that doesn't sound insulting.
Yeah.
What do you define as world design?
So
So what are you thinking of world design as?
I'm thinking that Tolkien-esque world design thing, where like the world itself gets fleshed out outside of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Um, So I've got two answers for that, and one I do a lot, and one I do very little. If you'll notice, I have my 3 volumes of Lord of the Rings right here.
Right.
And if you watch, like Tolkien's one of my biggest influences. In fact, if you watch North to Maine, like half of the main character's name is Frodo, and he's literally carrying a replica of the One Ring around
That's
his neck
dope.
to drop at Katahdin. Yeah. So here's the thing, there's 2 kinds of writers. You have planners and you have pantsers. Planners, like my wife's a brilliant writer. She is a planner. She wants to sit down and write everything out and understand absolutely everything about the world. Me, I am much more of a pantser. It's because I'm just more into doing things.
Right.
So what I will do is I will just kind of throw myself headfirst into a series and a world and start to write around it. But the thing is that as I do that, I will actually build out the world and the characters. One of the things that I'm very interested in when I write is like when I want to understand the mechanics of how everything works.
Right.
It's like very important to me. So, for instance, I have a character. He's a side character. He's about to enter the main story named Jack the Giant Killer, and he's based off of the Jack the Giant Killer and the Brave Little Tailor, those classic stories, because all of Swaza draws very heavily from folklore
Yeah.
and mythology and fairy tales. So what I realized was that Jack. One of the things that occurred to me after I started writing him immediately was that Jack was a liar. He actually did. He desperately wanted to be a hero, and he actually did do the feats that he said. But he was like a habitual liar. But as he lied, he had actually one of the magic beans that he'd been given. By the way, this is a huge spoiler, but it's all right. It's not giant, but he ate one of the magic beans, and as a result, his lies come true. So
Okay.
I sat down and I said to myself, okay, what? How does that work exactly? Because at first he doesn't know that his lies come true. He winds up lying like whole characters into existence. Like he tells a lie about his sister Jill, and boom, suddenly, a book later, there's Jill, exactly as he pictured her. So there's, I really like to think about the mechanics of that. And like, for instance, I would think to myself, like, okay, so what prevents Jack from just, once he realizes his lies come true, just getting whatever he wants by lying? Oh, wait, if he knows that it works like that, and he tells a lie with the intent of it coming true, it's not a true lie. He's
Yeah.
actually telling the truth, so nothing happens.
Yeah, it's no longer a lie, it's like a proposition to reality.
Yeah. And so he can only lie by accident. It can only be a real lie. So that's part of the mechanics of it. Then as far as like the world building itself goes, for Swaza in particular, I tend to do really deep dives into the actual original stories. So for instance, I'll go back to, just because it's in my, so in issue 6, 5 and 6 that we're about to have come out after 4 and the first trade comes. I've got Adam Bryce Thomas, who draws for Sonic the Hedgehog and Samurai Jack, doing the art, which I'm really excited.
Oh, that's
freaking
awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, he's basing it on Berserk, by the way.
Jesus.
Yeah. So the fairy tale that I'm pulling from, and Jack is in this story as well as Jill, is the saga of Rolf Kraki, which is about this very semi-historical fairy tale about a semi-historical Viking king and his sister Skuld half elven. And so, as I'm looking around for stories, I find this one where he's got his 8 berserker bodyguards, and she eventually kills him with an army of the dead. like, and one of the berserkers can turn into a freaking bear. So I just I just grab that and I read that story over, and then I imagine, okay, how does this fit into the world of Swaza? Because I imagine that Swaza is all of the fairy tales are on their normal course until a fairy does not get invited to a birthday party, and she looses a plague of undeath upon the world.
Right.
Because there were gold plates, and what are you going to do? So I'm like, okay, how does Rolf Krake fit into this traditional fairy tale environment that is living through a zombie apocalypse? And suddenly I'm like, okay, well, hang on. So Skuld was tortured to death in the story. All the berserkers died. Rolf died because this is Norse stuff and it's all grim and frostbitten. So suddenly I'm like, okay, well, there's a freaking Norse burial mound. And inside the burial mound, we've got, it's being guarded by a Draugr. Who's the Draugr? Oh, Skuld. So now I have Queen Skuld, half elven, who is both a dark, sorceress and a Draugr,
Right.
defending this grave, from our heroes who are going in after a sword based on a lie told by Jack. So a lot of the world building when I do something with Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, I'm both doing my own world building, but I'm also just grabbing stuff as much as I can from the real world and from real history and mythology and working it in. There's a riddle actually in there that's what slew none yet slew 12, which is from a completely different fairy tale, but it was perfect because in the original fairy tale, I think it was like a raven, like they ate a poisoned raven, and it wasn't very satisfying. But then I realized in the original Rolf Krake story, well, it was actually Odin the entire time trying to arrange the deaths of Rolf Krake and all of his berserker bodyguards so he could add them to his army in Valhalla to eventually fight in Ragnarok. So the answer to the story, ironically, is the answer to the riddle that they come into is it's freaking Odin who slew none, yet slew all 12 of them.
That's
so
awesome.
it's fun to find ways to fit things together. Now, there's also like world building, like the novel that I'm doing with Rogue, which is After All, which begins with the main character's death. A young woman dies in her sleep at 17 and wakes up to find out that she not only is the afterlife real, and everything she believes about it is true, but also everything everyone else believes about it is true, but it's all true in the same time in the same place.
Right.
And so suddenly I have this sprawling, 9 kingdoms of the dead, and I can, as I write, I throw things out, and I don't even necessarily know for sure what something's going to be early on, but I'm a gardener, and so that will grow, and suddenly the very large and elaborate cosmology will grow out of that. So the difference between what I did and what Tolkien did is Tolkien, created the language first and kind of told the story as an excuse to talk about the language because he's just that big of a nerd. That's hard for me. So instead, I, again, just toss myself at it. And, through trial and error and effort and luck, and I hope a little bit of talent, something really incredible comes out of that. And, again, it's like you work on a story long enough and you build it enough and you really it's not just about rewriting things. It's about really putting yourself into a position where you challenge yourself as a writer and you build characters who are real and will sometimes, push back against you when you try to railroad them into something. It winds up doing your work for you essentially. So I try to do it all at the same time. Like as Durruti famously said in Spain, we make war and revolution at once. I make world building and character and action at the same time.
Right. And the reason I asked is, of course, because there's value to both approaches. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of value that comes from the more seat of your pants sort of thing, like you were saying. And one of the things I notice a lot in video games is that we've leaned in that direction, or it mm-hmm. often feels like that, right? There are a lot of games with really interesting crunchy systems, if you know what I mean. I'm going to make an assumption. You've mm-hmm. played D&D or other role-playing games.
Yes. Yeah. I am currently, by the way, playing a Epic History D&D podcast on my channel where it is I play Buenaventura Durruti, pulled out of time along with Nikola Tesla, Rasputin, and Lord Byron, and we're running around in like revolutionary France about to storm the Bastille. So yes, I've played D&D.
So you know what I mean by crunchy systems, then, right? Where it's like lots of number crunching and so on.
Oh yeah, very focused on game mechanics. You're talking about Munchkin stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and then video games get these very crunchy systems in them. Um, there's a video game out there that I have at least one person who watches my channel somewhat frequently. That he really enjoys it. I don't particularly, because it's a mainly mechanics focused thing called Noita.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on a game called Falling Sand, which was just you watch sand fall and it interacts with its environment and whatever. In Noida, everything's rendered
Mm-hmm.
so that every pixel interacts with every other pixel and has properties. If you're not terribly familiar with
Yeah.
video game coding, that doesn't necessarily sound impressive, but if you're familiar with how video games work, that's a lot of work. Well, um,
Mm-hmm.
what I feel like games have missed out on is that Silmarils approach, that
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien-esque approach.
Yeah,
And
no, I think you're totally right.
um, so I'm interested in theater,
Mm-hmm.
in comics, in novels, or anything like that. Any in your experience, in the stories that you've seen and read, or even games you've played, what do you think there has been that has done a particularly good job of doing that more? What do you what it is it do you think that makes that more? I'm gonna keep referring to it as Tolkien-esque approach, because I
Mm-hmm.
can't quite come up with a better.
Well, the planning ahead of time essentially is what you're talking about. What's done a really good job of that. See, it's hard to know because if you have a talented writer from either, so the approach is planner versus pantser. It's really comes down to what works for you,
Mm,
and your predilection. I'm somebody that gets bored so quickly that like I try to do the planning really in depth, and I'm just like, oh my god. But my wife, total opposite. She's got to know what she's doing ahead of time. So it's very hard to tell. Like some people will say that, for instance, J.K. Rowling is a really good planner. I don't think that's true. I think she's actually more of a Gardner style writer, and
mm-hmm.
she tells people she planned it out in advance when she really didn't. Like I don't think Harry Potter was ever intended to be a Horcrux from the beginning of Harry Potter. I think that was something that came to her like around book 5 or 6. Same thing like with the Deluminator suddenly being important. That strikes me as she threw in a detail, she liked it, it stuck in her mind, and then she brought it back later because that's one of the things that you're supposed to do as a writer is you need to continually bring back things in just the same way that like if you're writing a song you need to bring back the chorus. um, I would say George R. R. Martin, but I know he has, because his stuff is so incredibly complex and so well planned out. But he has said that he is a Gardner type writer,
Yeah.
so I don't think he's doing it. So who's somebody?
Well, no, so I guess
Mhm.
because I'm not even particularly talking about the the planning in advance. I'm more so talking about like the results. You
Mhm.
thought George R. R. Martin was this meticulous planner. Something in the book told you
Mhm.
he was. And is there anything from your screenwriting education or your screenwriting experience, your comic book writing, that you think this might be is there some sort of element or idea or process, question mark, that you think contributes to that sort of thing?
To the feeling, yeah. I think there's a lot that would contribute to it. Okay, great example. And I'm actually 90% sure that the writer is a pantser, but Hunter x Hunter, the anime. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's phenomenal. It really, really good. Like the first 3 episodes are very slow, and they feel like good but average. But like that's on purpose, and you got to push through it. By the time you get to like the fifth season, it's it's the fifth season in a weird way is what the final season of Game of Thrones should have been.
Okay.
And in fact, in a weird way, Hunter x Hunter, this shonen anime deconstruction, kind of does everything the Game of Thrones TV show tried to do, and whenever they failed, Hunter x Hunter did it better. But they did a really great job of building out the world, and in particular, the magic system that they used, which is Nen. Because one of the big problems with, I'm sure you're familiar with Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there's only so many times you can fight a villain that can blow up the entire planet. And this issue with power creep in any kind of long-running series that deals with characters that make progress, runs into the problem of power creep. So in order to set up sort of the lore of this world and everything that's going on, he created the creator created this system called Nen, and you can tell that he's a gamer because it reads like something you could have pulled out of like a D&D source book, where like different types of Nen users have different abilities, and not only that, but like each ability is less of a game of like who is the strongest puncher or can throw the craziest ray, and more like, paper, rock, scissors.
Right.
So there's never going to be there is kind of like a super powerful Frieza character type. In fact, his design is a little based off of Frieza and Cell, but like he gets beaten, and he doesn't get beaten by the most powerful guy. It's other aspects of the world that kind of show you that there are lots of ways to be powerful and effective within this reality. So I think Hunter does a really, really good job of kind of building the sense that there is this very deep lore behind the world in the way that Tolkien has it. I don't know if that lore is written, but it feels like it is. And it also feels, what I really love about what he did, and the reason why I wanted to bring it up beyond the Nen system, is that you get a real feeling that the characters, both the protagonists and the antagonists, when they run into each other, they feel more like just people who live in this world that happen to bump into each other while they're doing their own thing, and in this instance they are fighting.
Okay.
Because of who they are, and so, and it's like little things like, there's a group called the Phantom Troop, for instance, which is, your standard, group of evil bad guys that one of the heroes wants to kill for revenge. And like part of the way through the series, like one of their members gets killed, like actually killed by one of the heroes in a pretty brutal way, actually. And, you don't see them sitting there cursing the hero's name. You see them mourning the death of their friend, and like there's like a whole episode where they're just like there hanging out talking about like their memories about him and how great the guy was.
That's
and
incredible.
Stuff. Yeah, so you can, whether that deep lore exists or not, you can gesture in the direction of it. And if you've done your job right, it will, either because you sat down and figured out all that stuff that's not in the book, or because you're so good at connecting things that you can make it seem like that stuff's out there. You'll get that feeling, that grounded feeling that you're looking for from Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, absolutely phenomenal piece of storytelling. One of the most one of the most influential pieces of art that's ever affected me. It's like Lord of the Rings, Calvin and Hobbes, The Sandman.
You're talking about Neil Gaiman's Sandman, right?
Yeah. I'm a huge fan. In fact, it's one of the reasons why Swaza switches artists every so often, because dreams are weird. He would switch frequently, and
right.
Swaza, you hear multiple stories from multiple people, like when you're actually hearing fairy tales and different versions of it. So the idea is that to switch artists every story beat or so to give that real kind of fairy tale experience. But you see, like, gesturing in the direction of there being hidden depths. And I think it can be done really well. There's also times I've seen it be done like really poorly, even when there was ridiculous hidden depths. A good example would be like that game that R.A. Salvatore wrote for that one studio that made like the one game and then went out of. It wound up being like very forgettable.
Wait, did you say R.A. Salvatore wrote a game?
Yeah, there
This
was a
sounds
game.
terrible.
There was a game that came out. It was by a brand new game company. I even played it. I played it to completion. I cannot tell you what it was called. I can only tell you that it revolved around like the Fae, and like a kind of a fantasy world with a war going on, and people kept getting resurrected. And I think it was like a battle to take control of the ability to raise people from the dead.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, no,
yeah,
I definitely got it mixed up. That's Kingdoms of Amalur.
yeah, that thing.
Yeah,
Like
I don't know
that.
I don't know who I got R.A. Salvatore mixed up with. Okay, that's the writer of the Drist series.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So, well, there's I'm sure there's a lot of people with the weird, initial names that you probably thought was it. But yeah, Kingdoms of Amalur or whatever the hell it was called.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he actually did sit down and write out like friggin' 10,000 pages of deep lore for that game, but you didn't feel it in the game.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's actually, oh wow, that's a really good example of a game that just like, yeah, there's all this lore but no substance.
mhm.
Um
Yeah, and part of it was, the production company was kind of a scam, if I'm not mistaken. Allegedly, I think they made just that game. It was one of the most expensive games ever. Then they went out of business.
damn. That actually got a re-release here recently,
Oh,
I
it did.
believe. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
cool.
it's really weird that it was sort of a flop, but it got a re-release. But yeah, cuz one of the things I really want to focus on in specific on my channel is like I'm going to refer to it as Ludo narrative. I don't think it's what other people
Hmm.
refer to as Ludo narrative because people talk about how Life is Strange is a really good Ludo narrative game, and I don't think that's true at all. Um, it
Refresh my memory on Ludo Narrative. I watched H Bomber Guy's video on it, but I've got so many different writing terms like kicking around in my head.
so Ludo narrative is a compound term.
Mhm.
Ludo or ludonic being play, and
Mhm.
then it's Ludo is I play, and then narrative is of course narrative. So it's the play story. It's the story that I do.
Mhm.
And it was I was on my way home from work the other night when I reached out to you because I was like, wait, this is a person who writes comics and stuff.
Mhm.
And then when I realized you were in theater, theater's the place where I am really interested because does theater have any particular advice for making a story look actionably believable? And I have no idea if that makes sense as a sentence.
Actionably believable.
Yes.
So, I mean, as far as what you're talking about with Ludo Narrative, it's essentially the physical act of playing the game is what tells you the story.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, kind of like, and I don't know if this is the right example, but I'm trying to think, kind of like Dark Souls,
Yes.
essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dark
Okay.
Souls is one of these games that's like really well known for everything you're doing
Hmm.
involves the story. Even and there's a second story going on specific to your character. And it's actually that other story. So,
Yeah.
mechanical immersion is a huge thing in Dark Souls. As you
Hmm.
add more weight, your character moves slower, gets worn out faster, and all of that plays into the other narrative as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, so okay, their theater is very interesting because it's really like it's everything from Broadway to underground plays being put on on a shoestring budget to people putting on a play. I once, for instance, put on plays in elevators, like in Louisville for a company called Specific Gravity. We did a play where it was a night of short plays, and people would come into this like big skyscraper that had been shut down, and they would get into the elevators, and as they rode the elevator up, like a play would take place within that elevator, and then they'd go and ride another one down, and they get another play there, and they would intersect, and it was really
That
interesting.
sounds incredible.
Yeah,
And
it was really interesting, really creative. I had to take anti-nausea medicine because I kept going up and down and up and down the elevator. um, yeah, so you've got that. You've also got stuff like Sleep No More. There are interactive plays that people have done
Mhm.
where like you are able to and encouraged to go through, like in Sleep No More, it's Macbeth, so you're going through Macbeth's castle, seeing these scenes, but you can walk up and open boxes and look in them, and it's totally interactive. And then, I mean, there's even plays like Bertolt Brecht, who specifically worked to make sure that the audience would not get swept away by the story, would know
Right.
at all times they were watching a play. It's all about what people are trying to accomplish.
So actually, Brecht is a so I think we can try to draw a parallel between Brecht and Stanley Parable
Hmm.
that can help. Are you familiar with the game, the Stanley Parable?
I am not.
Okay, so the Stanley Parable is this very like Portal-esque game, but the
Hmm.
entire time it's how do I even describe it? I'm sort of a it's a walking simulator where you're not supposed to follow the story.
Hmm.
And you're like consistently the narrator's constantly telling you a story, and then you go the
You do the other thing.
yeah, you can follow down the story the narrator's telling you, or you can look behind the door and then you see that the whole wall falls over on around you because it's constructed for you. It
Hmm.
actually uses Brechtian theater techniques to try to draw your attention to we're
I
playing a video game.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. Yeah, and doesn't Undertale do some stuff like that as well?
Yeah, I think it does much more what you might specifically call Brechtian theater techniques, because
Hmm.
it doesn't do the whole it doesn't do the whole now we're on a spaceship flying through space, which is a unicorn
Hmm.
sort of deal, but it's well, Undertale has quirky lines like that, but Stanley Parable, as far as I'm aware, doesn't as much. um I, it's very strange because Stanley Parable, hold on, my brain keeps trying to force reset onto topic, but because so if you're not familiar with Stanley Parable, I don't know if drawing a correlation will really help a whole lot with this, because what
Well,
I'm
I think
trying
I
to
saw. I think H Bomber Guy might have done a thing about it because I have watched him, and this sounds like something I vaguely remember watching a YouTube video about years ago.
well but if you're not terribly familiar, then it might not work really well, because it's like trying to correlate Brechtian theater with
Hmm.
Stanley Parallel or Stanley Parable is a similar parallel to what I'm referring to. It's like this actionable believability is
Hmm.
sort of in a way what the question I'd be asking is like, in what way does have you seen theater successfully, it's hard to say, draw their audience in, and
Hmm.
more so make the world believable enough that emoting with it doesn't feel cringe. I
Yeah.
don't know how to. I don't because like
Get them. Yeah. Well, I mean, theater traditionally. So you're talking about how does it draw its audience in while the audience is very much aware that they're having a play, or are you talking about like suspension of disbelief where you just get swept up by the story and you forget that you're there? Because
Um, I guess to a degree it would be the second one, but
Mhm,
like you know how you're watching Romeo and Juliet and you're emotionally affected by the death of
mhm,
these two dumbasses who just stabbed themselves or whatever.
mhm.
You
And by
you
the way,
get
I know high school English teachers love to use that, but I have a different interpretation of that. We can get into that later, but keep
but
which I figured out, by the way, by watching the ballet of Romeo and Juliet.
oh
Yeah, you miss it entirely in the show, like in the traditional play, because there are words and they get in the way. But yeah,
nice.
so continue.
So, um, actually, that's actually a really good illustration of the point because what happens with these plays is
Hmm.
I feel like most often what happens is you don't get wrapped up in the story, you get wrapped up in the story's involvement with itself.
Yeah.
Oh Jesus! So
No, no.
yeah, with the story's involvement with itself, right? So Romeo
Hmm.
and Juliet are in love; they go through this whole narrative thing. Whereas in a video game, there's supposed to be a third layer of engagement, and I feel like there's advice you can give to actors that amounts to how to create ludonarrative association, but I
Hmm.
don't know how to first communicate what the fuck I just said in a way that doesn't sound like I'm rambling, and
Yeah. Hmm.
second, um, if such a thing is even recognizable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's a lot of ways you could do it. Ironically, so I'm going to be terribly conceited and cite two of my own plays here.
Dope.
Um, one of the plays that I wrote, these are both shorts. Well, no, it's so there's a 90-minute one called Mike. It was my third play I ever wrote, first one I ever really had fully produced, and it was set in the New York underground open mic scene. And one of the things that I really wanted to make sure happened was that when you're in an open mic, like an actual open mic, you are in the audience and then you leave the audience and get on the stage and perform for everybody else. So I had actors placed in the audience who would appear, stand up, heckle. I had a guy playing a drunk homeless man who came in and then eventually got on the stage and stuff and that worked very well to draw the audience in and make them feel like part of the play. And
Yeah.
one of the ambitions that I had was to literally have an open mic slot where you could pull somebody from the audience up, or you'd have a local artist on, ready to go if in case nobody wanted to do it, um, where you could actually get them up onto stage to perform for a couple minutes or something.
I was
Because
actually about to ask
Mhm.
if you'd ever had somebody try that during that performance.
No one attempted to during the Fringe. The Fringe has some very strict rules. But I probably could have gotten somebody to do it if I had prompted it properly. There was a play, Demonology, that I saw. I forget who did it. It wasn't very good, but it was very interesting in what they did, because they put it on in this giant warehouse in Brooklyn, like just across the river, and it was one of those places like you go, and you're like, "Am I in a Batman movie now?" And you walked up into this giant place, and they told you essentially that they were going to be summoning the devil in the building.
Hey.
Yeah, and so like just the act of walking around in the building, and it was really like they didn't fully manage to live up to the awesome setting and everything that they'd done, because it was essentially just a bunch of sketches that you had to walk to.
Right.
Um, but I think that really did a good job of pulling people in. Unfortunately, also at one point we were standing too long, and a woman next to me had locked her knees, and she literally
Oh my
passed out.
god.
Yeah.
Honestly, that performance sounds a lot like the Sleep No More performance you were talking about as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and they may very well have been informed by Sleep No More.
like those kinds of performances sound particularly good. Unfortunately, they're not necessarily techniques you can apply to video games. You're not gonna until you start involving VR, in which case you do have your player actually moving about the room.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, these are all just different ways of telling a story, and it's as you switch from medium to medium, there's new little things you can play with. Theater, is really good with dialogue. Like
Hmm.
that's what theater does. It gives you excellent dialogue. It's also, stuff on stage. If you're not good at stage combat, don't do it because it's often ridiculous. If you're good at it, it really shocks people. Similarly, like nudity, bam, that hits really hard on stage in a way that it doesn't, if you're just watching a movie. Um, and like other things that will hit like really well on stage are just, yeah, audience participation, breaking the fourth wall. All of these are things that literally can't happen in a movie. Um, then you go to film. Film has the ability to do cuts, and
Yeah.
the cuts really it makes film very, very visual and allows you to tell a lot of information like really, really quickly without saying much of anything, which is great. And that's something that a lot of cinematographers play with, and the angles of the shots and everything. Comics are really, really interesting. And I honestly think comics is the hardest thing to write out of all of them, um, because you have to do it. It just takes so much brain power.
Hmm.
Because like a movie, 100 some odd people are working on it. Comics, you've got two or three
Right.
or six, and really it's just the writer and the artist and the letterer. But like a lot of comics, you realize is how to manage how quickly someone's eye moves around the page, how quickly they devour the pages, and if they actually pay attention. You have to be cognizant of color. The eye is lazy and it's attracted to empty white space. So anything white that you put on a page, the eye is instantly going to be drawn to. You have to be aware of that. Your panel placement is really important. I mean, they talk about Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a phenomenal book. I recommend any artist read it. But he talks about how comics, one of the things that they do is they deal with time because of how they're able to move. It's a jump from one still image to the next to the next. Um, and then stuff as simple as you'd never think about this if you're not writing a comic book, but you have to think about every panel you do gives the artist less space to work with, so you try to tell it in as few panels as possible, but you need a lot of panels because otherwise then you've just got one big drawing per page.
Right.
And like you want to do a reveal, for instance, you have to be aware of what number page your reveal comes on, because if your reveal is on an odd numbered page, that means as the person is reading the even numbered page, they're catching out of the corner of the eye the reveal on the other page, and there's a chance they'll look over there and skip it and hit everything out of order. So you really need to put it on an odd numbered page so they have to turn.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's one I didn't even think about.
Yeah. And
Because
that. Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, I've done like an allusion to fucking comic design. I've tried doing comic design before. One of the things actually that really caught me up on it is I have no idea how to find a fucking artist. Unless you
Oh,
already know an artist, it's finding an artist is like really
I'll
difficult.
tell you, Twitter.
Yeah, no, I've went through Twitter for commissions.
Mhm.
I can't imagine the price on commissioning an entire comic book.
It's depends on who you get. Some people will work for less. Some people will work for more. Kickstarter is what's made it effective for me. I was able to work something out with Hyando, my first artist, that allowed me to actually be able to pay for his work and not bankrupt myself. And then, like with Luana, she agreed to do a couple of pieces of art in advance for the Kickstarter, and then I ran the Kickstarter. It was successful, and it wound up being a very lucrative proposal for her. Also, once you are successful on Kickstarter or crowdfunding, once you have that initial capital, it becomes easier to attract other people.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons probably Luana trusted me was I had already had a comic book that was published and in stores.
Right, right.
But but yeah, or it could be just as big as, you find your friend. You can always also check out like art schools, people who are graduating or close to graduating, who are looking to do projects. People at the beginning of their career can be very hungry and eager to do something. And they may not be as cash motivated at that point. Like, you get to a point in your life, like with me, I have a son and a wife, and a mortgage and
Right.
stuff that I've got to, so I have to be more careful about how I spend my time. But like, a lot of the work that I did in theater, as much as I didn't like it, was pro bono, or for very small stipends that were basically just beer money. And it was like that for years. Because there's no money in theater, by the way.
Oh
Like
yeah, no,
nothing.
I'm 100% aware. I did lighting for a short period of time.
Oh yeah. Well, you can. So the technical people can sometimes bring in some pretty good money, but also they get hired by not just plays, but like
Yeah.
rock stars and stuff like that. So, but yeah, their theater, yeah, there's everything's held together with spit and duct tape. Um,
So
yeah.
there was one point where I did the lighting for a show.
Hmm.
I was brought in 3 days before.
Hmm.
The only other person doing lighting was brought in 3 hours before, and me and him hated one another. Like,
Oh,
I
that
had
must
to
have been
show
fun.
him all of it, and it was being done for a college show,
Hmm.
and my friends brought me in 3 days before. They showed me how to run all the lights, and I'm like, the day of, I'm like, I really need a second set of hands. I need someone else to help me with this. And I just walk down into the student lounge like, hey, you want to do lights for this show?
That's great. I did lighting once for a local. I did lighting and stage combat for a local production of Peter Pan in my tiny Kentucky town that I'd lived in for like 7 years. After I got out of college, and I remember the director at one point. He told me, because we had stuff to work with and whatnot. But I guess he'd read somewhere in a book that amber lighting looked good or something. So like anytime I gave him a look, he'd look at it and say, "Can it be more amber?" And so I'd go in and add a little bit more amber, and I started to just get annoyed that I kept getting the same note over and over again. So one of the things on Captain Hook's ship, I just went up and I put like every single gel was amber. There was not a non-amber light on the stage, and he looked at it and he goes, "Can it be more amber?" And I'm like, "No."
No,
This is a,
not unless we're gonna encase it in tree sap. Calm the fuck
yeah.
down, buddy.
We have peak amber, sir.
That's
um,
fantastic.
yeah, but that is really cool. Yeah, and that's a lot of theater is like that. You just grab whoever, and the show must go on, and some really amazing stuff oftentimes comes out of that. I don't know why, but it happens more often than it really should. um, but yeah, so I mean, to kind of, I guess, we're kind of out in the weeds at this point, or maybe we're not. I'm really enjoying the conversation, but did you want to pull this back? Because I think you wanted to talk a lot about world building, and was there anything
Yeah.
else?
So, uh, story design and world building are like the sorts of things I imagine most of the value can come from. Now,
Hmm.
how how much of the design of your story, you said that you are an organic writer, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that means as you're writing, you have maybe not so much idea as to what your characters are going to do, possibly even panel by panel, because I know, like, when I'm writing, it's line by line that who knows
Hmm.
what these fuckers are doing.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the story I'm telling. I usually have a vague idea, and sometimes if I'm not sure, I'll contact like my editor or one of my actor friends or something. We'll just work through it and break the story. A good example, actually, is I'm working on a prequel film for my Buenaventura Durruti film, and me and one of the producers who optioned the first Durruti film, because they wanted to make this one, we just sat down and had a series of meetings where we broke the entire story from beginning to end. Um, and that took a couple of weeks, and now I'm writing it and it's just flying by, and I'm going to be, sometimes it'll take me like a month to write a full length play or film. Maybe it'll take me half a year. This one, really, I think when I'm done, it will have taken me, because I broke the story ahead of time, 3 weeks maybe, and
Nice.
really the actual writing 1 week or maybe 5 days. There's also a bit of a trick, and that's story structure. So this is all right. So this is something writers don't like to talk about because it gives away a bit of the game. And also we don't like to talk about it because it sounds like you're pulling the art out of it and making it more about craft. But I don't believe that. I think that story structure is actually really important for writers to learn. I was afraid to learn it because I thought it would kill my art and make things formulaic. But I realized, learning from George Strait, from Jacob Kruger, from all these wonderful people, that it wasn't so much that it's not a paint by numbers. It's more you. If you're writing your story and you hit a point, you're like, I don't understand why this scene isn't working. It feels like it's dragging. I can't figure it out. You go to the structure. And the thing is that humans, we've essentially culturally come to expect stories to happen with certain beats. Hollywood in particular latched onto this because most of the people driving movies in Hollywood only have time to read one book about screenwriting, so they get story by day, they grab like Save the Cat or something and they read it, and then they go to everybody and like, do it like that, do that thing, that's the thing that I know. But essentially the stories, like as you would see in a Hollywood movie, but also in a video game, in anything, they break down into a very specific structure. And the structure that we have come to expect usually breaks into about 7 different acts. Well, 7 acts, which can also be spread out over 3 acts. So you've got Act 1, you go in 10%, you've got the inciting incident, you go a little bit further, you run into like crossing the threshold. And as this structure continues, it can help you figure out what your story needs and when it needs it by purpose of reverse engineering. So like, for instance, a big thing in the 3rd act, and lots of people have trouble with the 3rd act because it's the least, well, second and third are kind of tied with each other because they're the most nebulous. You tend to find, especially in action films, there is first, after the 50% mark, you get to about 60%, and in Hollywood they say it's sex at 60. It's not necessarily actually sex,
right?
But it is a moment where your characters are unguarded, and there is a hint of what could happen if everything worked out. So if everything that the characters want and the audience wants worked out, we get a flash of that. And usually they're drunk or high or in bed or whatever. So sex at 60 is a really big moment. Beyond sex at 60, you get to like first pursuit to the goal. The first pursuit to the goal will end either with a false victory or a false defeat, which will then lead you into the dark night of the soul, which is the lowest moment for any of the characters when absolutely all hope seems lost. As you come through the dark night of the soul, you get to a part where George would call this crazy suicidal plan. And this crazy suicidal plan that they have, if the first one ended with a false victory, the second one will end with a false defeat, or vice versa. Usually, it doesn't have to, right. But that kind of symmetry people really, really tend to respond to. And then you get into your climax and the end. So like, and you will find with this structure, and especially with Hollywood movies, you can actually, once you know it, you can predict what a movie is going to do sometimes, like down to the minute. My wife, she went to see the Dracula movie, like the one that had like some of the Game of Thrones actors in and such when they were trying to launch their Marvel monster cinematic universe. And
Okay.
like, yeah, so like early in the first act, they talked about like how he needed to not drink blood. And my wife immediately just turns, because she'd learned this from me. She just turns to her friend watching the movie with her, and she's like, "At 7:45, he's gonna drink blood." And everyone kind of looked at her like, "What?" And then, of course, he's drinking blood. My wife's like, "Ah!"
That's so fucking good.
Yeah. So like, yeah, and what I want to stress with this is it's not an exact science. Like knowing
Right.
a structure will not mean it's a good story. And similar, it will just mean that if you know the structure, you have an easier way, if something's not working, to go back and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And to know, maybe to get an idea of maybe what the story needs. So like a lot of stuff will then make things be much more satisfying. Like, have you watched Loki, for instance?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you should. It's really good until the last episode, and the last 2/3 of the last episode is absolute garbage and just falls on its face. And I will go on record with that. Loki is brilliantly done. Beyond that, I really like. It was about pitch perfect for a Marvel series for me until the last, 2/3 of the final episode, in which it just felt so cheated. I've talked to so many people, and they're like, "Yeah, it was really lovely, except for the last episode. Like, what the hell happened?" Like they still really like it. It still does very well on Rotten Tomatoes, because you can earn a lot of goodwill, and people will just convince themselves they like it.
Yep.
But because I understand story math in much the same way that if someone understands music theory, I can like go in there and be like, okay, your themes are not connecting here. This character was not foreshadowed properly here. As a result, it seems like this is coming completely out of nowhere, and it's not working on enough levels. So it's not connecting. There's not quite enough unity. And that sounds very vague. And the only reason I'm doing it is because you haven't seen it yet. I don't want to spoil anything.
Right.
I may do a video on this where I go like really into depth on it.
Nice.
But like the point is that you can pretty easily diagnose story problems that other people who aren't this kind of nerd, who haven't immersed themselves in the craft of writing and storytelling, just they can't say this is wrong because this guy wasn't foreshadowed. They'll say like, that seemed to come out of nowhere, or they'll say, I really felt like it dragged, or they'll say something like, I'm not connecting with the character. Like 9 times out of 10, there is something wrong with with either your themes or your structure, or the other thing is that you're not feeding the genre beast. You talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
This is really important. And Lord of the Rings, everybody gets on Lord of the Rings because it breaks traditional structure. Like they destroy the ring, and then there's still like half the last book to go.
Right.
We don't expect that, Not saying it's bad, but it's very different. And so people will bump on that naturally, and some people will feel not fulfilled by it. Other people will just love it. So like, wait, what the hell was I talking about? I was about to say something really important, and it just Lord of the Rings. Okay, you talk about the lore of Lord of the Rings and the feel of the world.
Right.
And I'm going to guess that if you're like me, you go into especially a fantasy story wanting to get that feeling, that magic, that ineffable thing that you can't quite put into words, but when you see it, and when you feel it, and you're constantly looking for it.
Yeah. And it's what I look for. It's that sort of je ne sais quoi I'm talking about for as far as video games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a theory. I learned a word recently from Wendy Pinney of ElfQuest. Did you ever read ElfQuest?
Nope.
Oh my God, you need to read ElfQuest. It's all free online, by the way. Just Google it. Wendy Pinney, I grew up on it. It's a really awesome series about elves that are actually aliens. And that's not a spoiler. I mean, it kind of is, but no, not really. um, but anyway, like ElfQuest, she pointed that there's this Welsh word called, and I'm going to probably mangle the pronunciation, Hiriath. And what it essentially is it is a word describing a longing for ancient places that maybe never were. It's like it's not even like nostalgia. It's beyond nostalgia for something that you have. It's like having nostalgia for something that you've never experienced, and that probably no one has ever experienced. It's kind of the lost pieces of our soul calling to us, and it is everywhere and nowhere. And the fantasy genre in particular, in Tolkien, is very good at feeding this. I think is probably a core human need. And really good video games that immerse you in their world building are probably feeding that Hiriath.
Yeah, so this is actually a term that exists in the real world. It's hold on.
Saudaja.
Saudada? That's what the robot lady tells me it is.
Saudada.
Yeah.
How do you spell that? Because I haven't heard that one.
Saudade.
Saudada.
And this is
a new word today.
A somewhat melancholic feeling of incompleteness. It's related to thinking back to situations of privation due to absence of someone or something. Oh, hold on. This is... Never mind. Nope.
No, this is an interesting word.
Yeah.
But yeah, but you understand what I'm saying. Your soul is longing for something. We define that something kind of as magic, or a very specific kind of Tolkien-esque magic. A good example, like it might be that Frozen, for instance, is my favorite Disney movie because it's the only Disney movie I've ever gotten that feeling from. Like there are very specific things that has to happen with a story, and part of it is that when you watch a movie, like before you watch it, you kind of come in with certain expectations that a certain emotional experience will take place. And if that emotional experience does not take place within that movie, people are going to be pissed.
Yeah.
And so that's what writers will often call feeding the genre beast. So, for instance, Frozen, they resolved a lot of things, but you got to think all the little girls who are going to come in there, they want to see a Disney movie, and there must be a princess.
Yep.
There must be a kiss. Yeah. And you notice that, like, they did all of those things differently, but it wound up being one of their most successful films because they still managed to feed the genre beast. They just fed it in a new and unexpected way. Whereas a movie like Tangled, which isn't bad, it's just forgettable.
Right.
It hits the beats, but it doesn't really feed the genre beast in a satisfying way.
Right.
It's like a great, 4-course meal versus fast food.
What was the term you used?
Hiriath. I had actually posted it in the thing.
In the what?
I had posted it in the thing. Here we go. Hiriath. Hiraeth.
Okay.
It was in the left group that we're both in. Says noun, especially in the context of Wales or Welsh culture, a deep longing for something, especially one's home. I could not be getting. Mm-hmm.
I can actually, I think I can even compare this to something that happens in video games.
Mm-hmm.
So in City of Heroes, one of my favorite experiences in that game was when I hit level 6 and my character first started to fly.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever played a video game where flight is a thing, the first flight is the only one you will enjoy that much. The first time your character takes flight, and then after that you'll want that point again. But you're 10 hours into flying in this video game, and you're just like, it's now flight. It's just how I've been getting around since level 6.
It's just it. Yeah. The first time when I was playing World of Warcraft, the very first time I took a griffin,
Hmm.
and experience the world as the great. And it was basically just a ride, but it was mind blowing. Yeah. So here we go. This is the way it was described to me. Here, a homesickness for a home to which you cannot return, a home which maybe never was, the nostalgia, the yearning, the grief for the lost places of your past.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in a way that may be what you have been looking for that Lord of the Rings feeds very, very well.
Yeah.
ElfQuest feeds it for
S-
me. There's a number of other series
So
that really do it. Yeah.
there's actually, I think, a genre of story that does what I'm thinking of pretty well,
Hmm.
and that being thrillers and
Hmm.
horror. Because have you ever watched a movie that makes you feel a little crazy when you're watching it?
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Something like The Number 23 or A Beautiful Mind, where like
Hmm.
you're following the story, but in following the story, you're keeping up, and but you're like, I'm missing something, or like, am I now thinking like a madman? Uh,
Yeah.
Lovecraft apparently was pretty good at evoking that feeling. I say apparently because, just like every other fan of Lovecraft in the modern world, I've never read Lovecraft.
I have, but just a bit.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Um, but like is there anything in theater that really does that actually? That really makes you feel crazy alongside a character in the, because like I'm a fan of Jekyll and Hyde and it doesn't
Hmm.
really do it.
Hmm. I'm
uh,
trying to think of plays that I have personally experienced that do that. I think to tell you the truth,
I don't know if it's a thing theater can do.
I'm almost certain that it has done it. I'm trying to think of a couple of plays that might have done it. I mean, obviously, there's Macbeth. I think that one touches on the edge of that. There's a play called The Miser that does something like that, where uh, they use the stage, the actual, like certain productions are able to do it. One example might actually be there was a trick that was used in the Crucible, because I played John Proctor in the Crucible. Loved that. In one production of the Crucible, not the one I was in. For instance, they had the character whose name escapes me at the moment, but the guy who's the witch finder, the original witch finder, who brings the books that have all the information about the witches and how to catch them and all that stuff. And he comes in and he puts the books on the table, and they managed an effect to where when he was carrying the books, they looked like slightly off, and like the perspective was wrong, like someone had built the books wrong. And then when he placed them on the table, they were able to make it look like the entire world shifted and the books were actually fine.
Oh my
So it's
god,
like,
that sounds incredible.
yeah. So I mean, it has been done. It's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Another thing, oh my god, actually, Julie Taymor's Lion King on Broadway. They have an effect in Lion King on Broadway when freaking Mufasa appears in the sky, like in the Disney movie, but it's like you are freaking giant lion god is talking to you. They used a bunch of like reflective surfaces and stuff, and like literally, like if I had gone into that play on a few hits of LSD, I might have come out being like, "So wait, is God a lion?" Like that's how
That's
good the effect was.
incredible. That
So
sounds
so it,
incredible.
yeah, it can be done. It's just rare because it requires like a lot of creativity,
Yeah.
and it requires like really really good set design and props
And
and lighting.
stagehands and actors even to
Yeah.
really sell it to you.
Yeah, exactly. And to tell you the truth, a lot of times, uh, production people are dissuaded from doing really interesting things. I remember they said in theater that you should never put anything on stage just because it's cool, which I disagree with wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I get what they're trying to get at, but no. Like you absolutely need to have there was I at one point wanted to do a production of like Waiting for Godot, where anytime there was an entrance or exit, the character came in from a different side of the, so like you walk on and then like come up a freaking like ladder, and then like come down an elevator like into the stage. Like just keep surprising people with where the hell is this guy going to come from next. And would that have been distracting? Yes, but it would have been awesome. So shut up.
Right. Man, has anything Lovecraft been well adapted to theater?
I haven't seen any
Okay.
adaptations of Lovecraft that were really well done. I think largely because, again, you need a decent budget to really do that, or you need to be really, really creative.
Well, I don't know about that, because as far as I'm aware, a lot of the feeling of Lovecraft comes from dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So like you don't need a good budget for even for even adapting Shadow over Innsmouth, which supposedly puts the creatures on screen. You just have your fishing town background. You have your Sweeney Todd style background, and
I mean, you can do that. I think the last time I saw theater done with Lovecraft, it was by we used to go to Dragon Con a lot, and the Atlanta Radio Theater Company. They would do Lovecraft adaptations, and that was literally just an auditory play, so you were just listening.
right.
I mean, I thought they did it pretty well, but I think the thing is that when you take it from the story
Right.
and you put it onto the stage, you need a visual component to work alongside that. So yeah, that's what I say. I haven't seen anything particularly well done. I wouldn't be surprised though if it was well done. The other weird thing about Lovecraft is like half of his stuff is public domain and half of it isn't.
Right.
So a lot of stuff gets like hamstrung. Yeah, because of IP, just in general screwing with everybody.
Yeah, about half the people I've talked to, not only here on the on stream, but outside of stream as well. We inevitably end up going back and forth about how like copyright as it exists is fucking awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, copyright, and I say this as somebody who somewhat directly benefits from IP or has directly benefited from IP, but also gets actively hamstrung by it. Like, I mean, I'm writing in a genre with public domain characters, but like I've had freaking Redbubble. I almost said RedTube. Redbubble. Yeah. Redbubble refused to print a shirt of mine because the character was named Rapunzel. Didn't matter that my Rapunzel was Spanish Moroccan with dark hair that was cut short, like, and had killed Captain Hook and taken his jacket. This was a completely new character based on a public domain character that, they just didn't want to screw with Disney at all. And so like they pulled it, for being a copyright violation. Similarly, like there's there's a Instagram model who apparently looks like Loki, and Disney sent them a cease and desist for their face. Like they weren't cosplaying Loki. They weren't trying to look like Loki. That's just their face.
Cease and desist now. What do you mean cease and desist? That's my face.
What is wrong with you? I mean, I've got a friend, Jake Jampel, who's a comedian. He got cast in a like a Citibank commercial where he rode like a roller coaster like all through New York City, as if it's on a Citibank card or something. I think it was Citibank. I can't remember for sure. And like he had to sign a contract and they own his head. Like he's like, yeah, so a company now owns my head.
Oh, that's
that's very weird.
Yeah, that is some cyberpunk shit right there.
Yeah. Well, and property rights or whatever we let people get away with. So just stop letting them get away with it, people.
Yes. Oh my god. That's the biggest one, is like, you gotta not let people tell you what to do with your own shit,
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly. By the way, it's probably, now that I'm looking at it, it's probably pronounced Heraeth or something. Or like I'm Hiraeth. I'm realizing I'm totally overpronouncing that.
I mean, at least we can get the spelling from your pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. Anyway, I guess that's a big part of just kind of being a professional artist and content creator. It's tough, but I would say that's a lot of my process. Another big thing about my processes is that I often work from a single image that tends to appear in my head. I'll just get a mental picture of something and I can't get it out of my head, and I'll be like, okay, well that's the beginning of my next story. I'll just start writing from that image. Doesn't happen every time, like, but one of the times that it happened was I wrote a play called Berserker set in Iceland in the year 997. And I wrote it because I saw this movie called Valhalla Rising, and before the end of the first act, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be, I know what they're gonna do, and this is gonna be like the greatest movie ever. And then they didn't do it, and the next
Yep.
and it just got weird. And the next day I like went down to my roommate and I was like, oh my god, dude, like I was watching this movie and this was going to be so cool, and then it wasn't the movie. They didn't do the great thing. And he looks at me, he's like, aren't you a writer? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, can't you just do that then? And I'm like, oh shit.
Oh yeah. Wait a
And
minute. I design entire worlds.
yeah. So then I went and I wrote Berserker, which is a play of mine that has not yet been produced, and has a screenplay version. And I'm going to be, after Daruti, I will be, and NPCs, I'll be moving on to do a grim and frostbitten graphic novel adaptation of that. That came directly out of that idea and a specific image that I had of like Vikings in a longhouse, heavily kind of dark, oppressive atmosphere with a feasting table that had been pushed against the wall. And I had no idea why that table had been pushed against the wall until I started writing, and then boom, figured it out.
So, it, you work with comic books, you work with screenplays and theater and stuff. Is there anything, we've already covered that you are a fan of video games. Is there anything that you think from your storytelling experience elsewhere that you would like to see implemented into video games? Anything into general storytelling in a video game? Anything you think that video games could be using as a mechanism, or maybe even they absolutely can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you would like to see tried.
So I would really like to see. I talked earlier about Hunter x Hunter and how that series was really good at giving you the impression that there is a much larger world out there, and that the characters that are interacting with each other are their own people. They're all the protagonist of their own story, and they're just bumping into each other. And we happen to be following these protagonists because these other protagonists, who are our antagonists, smacked into them. And I really would like to see video games do that kind of character work. I would also like to see them do another thing that I've seen Hunter x Hunter do. I will never stop singing the praises of this anime. Hunter x Hunter will do this thing where the writer will like obsessively build characterization for characters that any other series, they would be the last thing on your mind. Like there are characters in Hunter x Hunter that like you run into them and you're like, this is just a one-time minor villain, barely a villain, just an obstacle for our heroes to overcome. and then they become like a key character in the entire series after you have completely dismissed them.
Right.
I would love to see that in video games. I think you could do a ton with that, because ultimately I think what's great about video games is that um, it gives you so much of an effect on the story, and it also allows you to affect the world and to become the character yourself. And as a result, I think that identification with the character and that level of power fantasy, it can be something more than a power fantasy. I really feel like you can probably get some of the realist character and like most beloved characters that we've seen in fiction if you are able to do that effectively. But the problem is that you're going to need to do that in such a way that the game is still fundamentally enjoyable to play. So and so what I would be looking for with that, honestly, is Pluto Narrative. I would be looking for the actual mechanics of the game itself to function in a storytelling capacity, to let you know more about these characters, about yourself as a character and them, and to hint at much larger lives and a larger world beyond what you experience. And I think that I've seen some games that have attempted it. Dark Souls kind of does it a little bit, in the sense that it does it by giving you very little information and making you fill in the gaps. But I'd like to see it in a slightly less cheap way, essentially. Don't do it just by not telling us and making us guess and making us do all the work. Like, you're the storyteller, do it yourself, and bring us into that, make us complicit in it. So that would be what I would really like to see out of video games. I mean, beyond that, what I'm usually looking for in a video game is a freaking amazing RPG that I can just totally get lost in, which is why I love Witcher 3 so much.
Yeah, that's honestly, that I think is what most people I'm going to connect with. That is to say, most people I'm going to connect with are really looking for, and that's the sort of game I'm looking to at least inspire thought into.
Yeah, well, that's freaking cool. I will also add this. So Skyrim. My roommate built his own PC years ago, just so he could play like really intricate Skyrim mods. And I got obsessed. And this is the hiker in me. I got obsessed with a mod that he got. It was like several mods where like you had to wear warm clothes, you had to eat, you had to set up your tent. Like,
Yeah.
I just wanted to freaking hike across
You know what?
Skyrim.
The thing that got me into this mode of thinking was when I was a starving, dehydrated, ill, homeless hobbit living outside of Riverwood in Skyrim, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's an actual world here.
Yeah.
Hold on, there's a world and I'm people in it. But yeah, we're going on about almost 2.5 hours here. So I think that's gonna be about it for right now.
Sounds good to me. And that's what you get for getting somebody with ADD on. Haha, I don't notice the passage of time.
The only reason I notice is because I've been sitting here staring at the timer, or else I would have just kind of kept you up until whatever hour. Yeah. But I actually did want to chat for a bit after the stream, so sure. I'm gonna go ahead and close out here. For anybody who's watching, I will probably be back in about an hour or a half hour, probably playing some Nova Drift or something and just sort of chill for the night. But for right now, that's going to be it. Go ahead and let people know.
Please, guys, plug my pluggables.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So you guys Google my name, Brenton Langel. I'm literally the only one in the world. So it's BrentonLengel. You'll find my website, brentonlengel.com. I am at Brenton Langel on Twitter. There's also at Snow White Bones, which is the Twitter account for the Snow White Zombie Apocalypse series. You can find and fund my work on Kickstarter, and I'm going to be launching an Indiegogo soon, and a backer kit. And subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's just search Brenton Langel on YouTube; it'll come up. But yeah, I talk about politics, art, philosophy, and occasionally I play D&D.
All right. But for right now, that's going to be it, everybody. In the meantime, y'all just remember nobody's cares. Thank you very much. And good night for right now.